So it's Friday, it's 12:30 p.m. and a very warm welcome to our Centre for Specialist Psychological Therapies Wellbeing Livecast. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Richard Duggins and I'll be our chair for today. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce our presenter, Stuart Mitchell, who you can see on screen with me with their headphones on. Okay. First, let me explain what we're going to do today. So Stuart's going to present for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to open up for questions, comments, and reflections. We'll use the chat function or the raise a hand function in Teams. And if you want that explained, I'll explain it in a bit. And we'll finish the day at 1 p.m. We'll send you the slides after the presentation, so there's no need to take notes. And our only request today, which everyone is doing, so that's brilliant, is that you mute your microphones and you'll turn your video off while you listen, as that helps everything work smoothly. So let me say a few things about Stuart before I hand over to him. Stuart is a consultant clinical psychologist and he's trust lead for personality disorder. He is a trained clinical psychologist, psychoanalytic psychotherapist, EMDR, MBT and DBT therapist, and MBT and SCM skills trainer and supervisor. Stuart has, alongside his colleagues, developed and leads the personality difficulties and complex trauma pathway, the PACT pathway, and the strategic clinical network, the SCN. He has provided considerable training on general and specialist treatment approaches to personality disorder, complex trauma, and mentalising locally and nationally. He has published a recent paper on mentalising and complex trauma, and he's currently co-authoring 2 books on structured clinical management and trauma-informed care in acute care settings. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Stuart now.
Okay, thanks, Richard. All right, I'll share my screen with you. Okay. Okay, you should be able to see my PowerPoint. Thanks for the introduction, Kevin, and thanks for everyone for joining us. It's great to be here. Let me just kind of get this, so I can see the chat function. So, what I want to do today is to talk about mentalising during the pandemic and how we can easily get ourselves, knocked out of kilter. So I want to talk about how we can rebalance ourselves. Let me just get this tech right. So what I want to do is share some reflections on how we've been coping with the pandemic, and to think about how our mentalising, I'll explain what that is in a minute, is affected by the pandemic, and to think about how our sense of balance is knocked offline by the many stresses to do with the pandemic and other things, and also have a think about what might help to bring us back and to get ourselves in a more equal state of mind, and also share some exercises with you that we'll send around by email afterwards that you can have a look at and try yourselves. Okay, so what I'd like you to do just for a minute is, if you wouldn't mind, using the chat function and just describe briefly one way in which your ability to stay balanced and reflect has been affected by the pandemic. So if you wouldn't mind doing that now, please. Waiting for people to put things in the chat box. Constant uncertainty, maintaining resilience, shutting off, tuning out a lot more than normal. Yeah. Lots of exposure to health, lack of face-to-face contact with patients and carers. The usual things I would do to switch off from work aren't available to me. Too much information, overwhelmed, not having time to myself, selfish children home all the time, right? Lack of physical touch, when I'm on my own. Increased stress impacts on my concentration and motivation. sense of powerlessness, everyday life, and lack of confidence. So some great things there. I think kind of all those things, it's not surprising we feel those things really, at this, very difficult time in a pandemic. So, I just want to move on, if I may, and just to think about this idea of mentalising. And what this is, it's a funny word, but all it is an imaginative, mental thing that we do when we think about ourselves or other people. And what we're trying to do is to create a mental, picture or a story about what's going on in a person's mind that then might help us to explain, why they do what they do. So what their intentions are. And I think this really captures the essence of our humanity and how we, relate to one another, and it can help us, rebalance ourselves when we do it reasonably well. Everyday example here is when you've got a friend who you see across the street and they don't seem to have noticed you, and then you think, oh God, have they ignored you? So it's easy to get that kind of not quite right. So that's just an example of when we might mentalise well or not. And just to have a think about this pandemic, I've been, thinking a lot about this over the months, as I'm sure you have. And these are some of the headlines that kind of occurred to me. The whole idea of self-isolation and quarantining, I think, is incredibly stressful, and it can be quite triggering for people to feel less in contact with people, face to face, in person. And the effect of feeling trapped, actually, and kind of unable to get out, it can be quite traumatizing for people. There's the whole thing about the loss of income and jobs and, purpose. Lots of jobs are being lost, and it's hard to feel as competent and as competent and as active. Lots of worry about the future. Kevin Mears has talked about this in a previous live cast. Huge fear and anxiety about what the future might bring and when we might get out of this pandemic. Much less structure to our lives. That might be improving now as we kind of come through this and the lockdown is lifted. But I think it's still a problem for some people. And this whole idea of proximity, I think this pandemic can actually reduce our sense of personal space and privacy and freedom, so we can feel that we're too close to people, but for others it might feel that we're too far away, and this can lead to all kinds of difficulties and tensions at home, which can kind of spill over for some. And there's all this media images, information and data and news, and lots of ideas about death and loss that many people have to face, and it's extremely hard to find a way to do that when you can't see people face to face. So lots of issues here that we're still kind of struggling with. Now, just how that links into mentalising. There's three main different types of non-mentalising that we find ourselves getting into. The first one is where we kind of get into a bit of a certain state of mind where you just say, I just know it's like this and it's not like this, and you get fairly rigid. So it's being quite fixed in the way you're thinking. The next one is where we get into what you might call waffle, and you get into a bit of a detached, perhaps intellectualized conversation. It's all because of this, it's all because of that, and it's not really very connected to something that is quite real and now and present. Kind of another mode is where we just feel as though we have to do something to change our state of mind. So it might be that we have to drink something, or we have to go for a run, or we have to act something in a physical way. But it can be a quick fix to trying to change our states of mind. Okay, so just to kind of think those through in terms of the pandemic, here's some ways in which we might think and talk about it. So self-isolation. So the idea of certainty, we might feel as though self-isolation and quarantine, it can feel like I'm trapped, I'm all alone, I'm just waiting for this threat to be over. So a hunkering down and isolating. So it's in quite a fixed state. Kind of another thought I've had kind of as recently is I feel confused now and more scared because I see people wearing face masks a lot of the time. So I feel more vulnerable and confused. And I feel as though I'm about to be operated on. So it's quite strange. Kind of another sense you might have is that you feel tired and stressed and on guard all the time. My body is trying to stay alert to this virus. I feel I'm in danger. So that sense of that dangerous feeling can stay with us. And this idea is the danger on the outside or the inside. Before the pandemic, you might have thought stuff and worries, come up from within. But actually, you might not be so sure now. It might be that actually there's a lot of danger outside too. Okay, so it's hard to know the difference. Waffle. I've heard some folks say, what's all the fuss about? I'm not bothered. I just carry on. It's no problem. I'll be fine. And some people I even heard say, some people are overreacting, or it's a fake news. But the other end of this, waffle thing is that it's easy to overthink things and to hypermentalize, to go into this obsessive, ruminative way of just, can't stop thinking about it. So that's another way of moving into a kind of a different kind of non-mentalizing. Quick fix is this idea of action and how we have to do things to make ourselves feel better. Some people might think, when they see people move away from them, I feel others are afraid of me, as though I'm going to infect them. Or this idea, I long for closeness and a hug, but I also feel afraid of it. And it just doesn't feel the same online. You don't have the felt sense of, somebody's presence in the same way. So you just need that physical contact. I've heard some people say, I feel so tired all this time with this online stuff, and I'm, working harder than ever now, and it's harder to keep this home and work life separate, with all the distractions. So it's just, throwing yourself into activity. I see another way we can get this quick fix is to just want to get away from the pain and the death and the images you see, and we could use alcohol or other things, but that can cause a problem if it's by itself. So there's some of the things. So just if you would just have a quick think about one thing that tends to throw off your reflective capacity or your mentalizing during this pandemic, if you would. So right, just for a minute, if you go to the chat function, and we'll just kind of see what you make of that. Okay, people are saying can't get to communion as the church is closed. Absolutely, people haven't overreacted. It's number 10. Trying to protect the NHS beds at all cost. Leaving elderly, vulnerable people. Yeah. Hancock. I don't know what that means. Social media overload. Absolutely, news. Or other people I care about struggling and having a bad day, poor sleep. Absolutely, it's hard to feel really rested. I can't go back to the office, and I can't focus on work at home. There's that balance, tiredness. Can't have these informal chats with people. Yeah, data, sleep problems, lack of time, everything taking longer to do outside of work. Yeah. Living at work, exhaustion. Yeah, can't see my family. So these are, huge stresses for people. Okay, pulled in all kinds of directions, trying to meet home, work, kids, and so on. Oh yeah, Hancock is the health secretary, who I call, Lieutenant Gruber. Okay, all right. Okay, so some lots of things throw off our mentalizing ability. I think that is And here's a few other things that would be familiar to you. Any strong emotion, so worry, fear, anxiety, shame, and so on. Kind of any sense that we don't want to think about something, or we can't stay connected to a sense of reality and what's happening. So avoidance or denial. Physical illness, being unwell, or having a learning disability or a neurological problem. This can also affect our ability to balance up our minds. Stressful events, death, work stress, pressure, kind of all this information, and the pandemic. I think this pandemic is a trauma that will have some long-lasting effects. Right, substances. Tiredness was already mentioned, and trauma. So many people are feeling, traumatized or triggered by this pandemic because it reminds them of, previous times when they're feeling overwhelmed, isolated, or unsafe. So these sort of things knock us off. So what helps us to rebalance? Here's a kind of few thoughts in terms of mentalizing. The first thing is to keep minds in mind. So it's to focus on, trying to imagine what's going through another person's mind. I can imagine how awful that is for you. It's trying to consider a person's intention. So you're trying, so hard to keep yourself safe. Is that right? So what are they trying to do? It's trying to stay curious. So I can see from your face that this looks like a real battle for you. Is that right? But you never know, so you've got to keep this, curiosity. And you're trying to get balance. So, here's a thought. So I guess you were doing okay, but when we actually, looked into it, you were really feeling very alone with it all. So you're trying to get a sense of a depth and balance. And then there's this idea that, someone was trying to keep, true to their feelings, but then decide not to do something. So you're trying to balance thoughts with intentions. So just if you would, just one last kind of chat task. If you just think one thing that can help, bring you back online, if you like, and bring you back to a more balanced place, what would that one thing be? So if you wouldn't mind going to the chat just one last time. I know I'm making you work. Mindfulness. Thanks, Michelle. Grounding, just stopping, yeah. Meditation, yoga, great. Talk or meet with friends whilst, social distancing. Knowing there is light at the end of the tunnel, really important. Fresh air and space. Meditation practice. Self-compassion, so important. A big heavy sigh, great. Thanks, Genevieve. Talking. Right, yeah, right. Not too much, hopefully. Taking a break, yoga again, running, cycling, yeah. So lots of movement stuff I'm getting here. Walking outside, gardening, time with the dog, listening to the birds. Absolutely. What I need to do kind of in the moment, having, something to look forward to. Breathing and connecting with myself. And holding in mind that others are, separate to me with different experiences. So right, Nicola. Humour. Yeah. Humour, so important. And being able to play, I think, is important as well at this very, very stressful time. Play helps to rebalance ourselves. So thanks for that. So, a few more thoughts about what else brings it back. I mean, you brought those very personal things back, but I think the things I would focus on are trying to keep mind in mind. So, when you mentalize someone, that helps them, learn to mentalize and keep their mind in mind. You're trying to develop a kind of realistic story, not one that is completely far-fetched, but something that is, plausible to what's going on for someone right here, right now. You're trying to be curious and open and flexible, not get something too stuck or rigid. You're trying to take a not knowing, not too certain, or not too expert stance, because actually, we never really know what's going on in a person's mind, without the curiosity. we're trying to focus both on our mind and the other person's mind, and to have a kind of balance between them. So if we're too fixed on ourselves, we might miss something, or if we're too focused on the other, we might lose ourselves. We're trying to consider, the impact of emotions. So, worry, fear, anxiety, terror. What effect does that have on the person in their day-to-day life? It all has an impact. Trying to focus more on the present than the past. I think it's so easy to drift and to get caught back in past experiences and past traumas, that we kind of miss what's most important right here, right now. So I think, that's how I keep my focus. I try to be non-judgmental. I still have opinions, but I think I say to myself now, we're all doing, the best we can to deal with something that is pretty awful for all of us. I think the most important thing is I try to balance all those things as best I can. And for me, what helps is when I feel that someone is interested in me, and they say things like, right, you can do it, Stuart. I know you can do it. And that really kind of makes me feel as though someone is mentalising me. I also give myself some care through exercise. That's the way I do it. I like being out on my bike or playing squash. Can't play squash, but I'm on my bike and I connect with my family and friends. House party, Zoom, all kinds of things. But my family and friends as best I can. And here's a nice quote, kind of to finish with. I think I try and use my voice for kindness, your ears for compassion, to really hear, your hands for charity, and your mind for truth, and your heart for love. So I think that's where I'd like to finish. And I'll pass over to Richard, for any questions. And there's a few books there if anyone's interested and wants to have a look at the books. So thank you. Questions? Fine.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Stuart. It was a great presentation. And also, thanks everyone for joining in on the chat. I was really impressed with how that worked and all the contributions. It was great. Thank you.
Great.
So now we've got an opportunity, just over 5 minutes, for your opportunity as an audience to ask Stuart a question or make a comment or a reflection. And you can do this in two ways. You can either write something in the chat function and I'll read it out, or you can put your hand up and I'll come to you to ask your question. So I think everyone's found the chat function now. Next to the chat function is the little hand, and if you press on that, that kind of raises your hand, and I can come to you. So we'll just give you a few minutes to write things, and I'll start coming to people. That'd be great.
Yeah, they are good on the chat function, aren't they? They're really good.
They are.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got Prasanna, you've got a question to ask, I think. If you have, would you like to unmute and ask the question?
Yes. Hello, Stuart.
Hi,
Thank you very much.
Prasanna.
It's very helpful.
Hi.
Just wondering, mindfulness and mentalizing.
Yep.
Are they two different notions, or are they kind of much of a muchness?
Okay, great question. They aren't the same. Mindfulness is about being attentive in the moment. Yeah, it's about mindful, non-judgmental attention. Mentalizing is trying to go one step further to try to work out the story behind why a person is feeling or acting as they do. So mindfulness helps mentalizing, but it doesn't go as far as mentalizing. So mentalizing tries to work out the mental picture, the thoughts, the feelings, the wishes, and everything that explains why we do what we do.
So that means that mentalizing is closer to what we know of open dialogue, getting people to describe their narrative, their real story. Would that be right? Or
All right, I don't want to go into the open dialogue too much. I might have to close the dialogue on that, but I'm not too sure because I don't know kind of enough about open dialogue. But the thing here about mentalising is that it's something we do. It's a verb. It's a very active thing we do with our minds, and we do it in the presence of a safe relationship. So it's not a task. It's something that we have to have in a relational sense. So if I mentalise Richard, looking at me, seeing if I make sense, and see if I'm on task and I'm not overrunning with the time, I'm mentalising him, and I hope he's mentalising me. And that might come into open dialogue, because lots of different therapies and different approaches do help people reflect better, but all of them do. Just mentalising, you are trying to do it explicitly.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Thank you very much.
All right.
That's great. We've got another question from Doug. This a question: what about using compassionate imagery exercises? You got anything to say on that, Stuart?
Yeah, I think absolutely, using compassionate imagery and trying to help a person, mentalize an image of what they need at this very, very stressful time. So if they feel very hopeless, or they feel disempowered, or they feel scared, can they imagine, bringing to that part of themselves that feels hopeless or scared or anxious or worried, some care and compassion and some kindness, so that part of them, I think about parts not in terms of a kind of a structural dissociation, but just a part of us that feels something. And it'd be trying to bring a compassionate or a caring image to help that part of us that feels afraid or scared or worried. So I certainly I use imagery a lot, and you can write it down, you can draw a picture, but the most important thing is to have a conversation with the client about with the person about what they can bring to their own self that feels something. Does that make sense?
Thank you very much. We've probably got time for one brief question if anyone's got one. Otherwise, we'll move on to closing. Does anyone want to ask that last brief question? It feels like maybe people have had enough to think about and digest. And
Okay.
one thing I can say is that when we will close this at 1, but Stuart will be around for about 5 minutes if people do have questions that they'd like to ask in that kind of smaller way. They'd be welcome to do that. Also, Stuart's given me some mentalization exercises that I'm going to circulate when I circulate his presentation. So I think that they'll be helpful and of interest to people as well.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm just going to put the end slide up, if that's okay, because just do that.
And while you do that, Richard, could I just add one last comment, just to say, the idea of what's happening, this weekend is a time of, lifting things and pubs and restaurants going back to things. But I would just kind of think, let's be careful and let's be cautious about that, because I think, there's a danger that we're going to just, forget all the social distancing and just be so relieved to get back to having a drink or seeing people face to face. But there's still risks around. So if we can just try to be mindful and think about the real risks that are still there, I think for everyone's safety, to have that in mind.
Right. So thank you very much, Stuart, and thank you, Stuart, for your really helpful and I think timely presentation and sharing your considerable expertise. And thank you to everyone for the contributing so well in the chat and bringing such great ideas, and also the questions that we had at the end. Just to say that our Wellbeing Livecasts continue this month. We're taking a break next week, but we return with in 2 weeks' time. And on the 17th of July, we've got Kalpita Kunde, who's Trust Lead for Psychological Wellbeing Services, and she's presenting on BAME conversations. And on the 24th of July, we've got Paul Nicol, Patient and Care Involvement Facilitator, who's talking about acceptance and where that might fit in with COVID-19.
Very good, yeah.
So we're looking for more presenters for our live casts. So if you're interested, please contact us and we can support you with this. And we're especially keen to hear different voices and perspectives. All of our previous live casts are on NTW or CNTW YouTube channel. If you've missed any, and Stuart's will be up there next week if you want to watch that again, or if any of your colleagues want to watch this. Thank you again for attending. Thank you again, Stuart, for a great presentation, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. So the live cast is now closed. Thank you.